Brightburn is directed by David Yarovesky and is starring Elizabeth Banks, as well as David Denman. Okay, so everybody in the world pretty much knows the character Superman. At this point, he's practically a phenomenon, and if they don't know the character, they at least know the symbol. This movie is not hiding the fact that the whole premise is basically inspired by the original Superman plot. So essentially, Elizabeth Banks and David Denman, they find a crash-landed spaceship near their home in Kansas, and it turns out there's a baby inside, and they raise it to be one of their own. The movie takes place around the time where Brandon, played by Jackson A. Dunn, he's recently turned 12, and in that, he's learning that he has super abilities. Unlike the character that this whole premise is based off of, instead of being somebody who is trying to be part of the world and help it as much as they can, things kind of turn for the worst from there. You've seen from the trailers, they don't do a lot about hiding what this movie is pretty much about. Something that I had mentioned in I think the Shazam review, where I think a good direction to go from here on with superhero films is to kind of make it a half genre, and in this movie, what they do is it's a horror movie and a superhero film. It's very much a what-if story of what if this character came to Earth and didn't have good intentions like Superman does. It's a thought that many fans have thought of, even video games like Injustice. They kind of go over this idea of what if Superman was bad and tyrannical almost. So the director, David Yarovesky, I haven't seen his work previously to this movie, but just seeing this movie alone, I can tell that the horror genre is definitely his strong suit. I can tell he really played a part in how he orchestrated the chemistry between the three characters, Brandon Byers and, his parents in the movie. The chemistry between all of them. It felt wholesome, but at the same time, it felt like there was this distance from the very beginning of the movie. It almost felt like there was something that wasn't right, and, rightfully so with where the plot goes. So to me, the especially noteworthy performances in the movie were Elizabeth Banks as Tori Byer and Jackson A. Dunn as Brandon Byer. Elizabeth Banks, she had one of the best performances in the movie when it came to the occasional humor they had in the film, the terror, and, just the parts where she was just being a mom with the character Brandon. I thought that it was so convincing and can't help but get sucked into a scene. So Jackson A. Dunn as Brandon Byers. I've only seen him as a cameo in Endgame. He was Scott Lang. He was like a young Scott Lang. And I thought that was funny, but it was like maybe a minute. So this is really the only feature-length performance I've seen from him, but I can't really see any other young actor pulling it off. He gave such a uncomfortably chilling performance playing this character. The movie started and he came off like this very much outcast and kind of just wanted to belong, and then eventually over time he kind of became this character that came off almost like this sociopath with a god complex, and it wasn't even over the top in the way that he made it come off that way. He was very subtle in his performances, and the character that he played is definitely gonna be, over time, this character that we all end up loving to hate, because he is so diabolical with how he goes about doing everything that he does in this film. Cinematography I really liked in the film. Coincidentally, me bringing up that this is inspired by Superman and all, there were a few moments where it kind of felt like a Zack Snyder-esque style of cinematography in the film, as well as, the bulk of the film, which is the horror aspects. And I can tell that the cinematographer, as well as David Yarovesky, really had a vision when it came to those horror aspects and the sequences that would happen in the movie. It felt very creature feature with Brandon every time there was a death scene in the film. All the horror related scenes, creative and brutal, and I thought that the practical effects as well as the CGI were really good in this film. Nothing looked like it was obviously fake or anything like that. You would be convinced from, what would happen to these characters. I also felt like the movie was too ambiguous. I noticed in 2019, the films that have been coming out have not been getting the ambiguity just right. For example, Us is not ambiguous enough. It kind of explained a little too much. I think it went a step too far. Whereas this movie was too ambiguous, and I felt like maybe they should have explained a little more. I felt like they were taking too much advantage of the fact that this is inspired by Superman. Almost like the writers were kind of relying on people to already know that premise. And what I thought was interesting is that it was slow paced, but at the same time, nobody was really fleshed out. Nobody in this movie really gets a character arc except Brandon, and even then, it's kind of really abrupt and quick and not really organic. And because of that, I just felt like everything writing-wise was pointing to a slasher-style film. For anybody who's watched a lot of horror films, more specifically slasher films or creature features, in those films, there's essentially rules. Like, for example, Freddy, if you take him out of the dream world, you can kill him. There are rules, and in this film, it is a horror film first. Brandon is the character that is killing all these people, and with it being inspired by the Superman character, naturally he's OP, he's overpowered, and this character doesn't have a kryptonite. There is one thing that they learn can hurt him, but the chances of actually successfully hurting him in the way that it could is very minimal, and because of that, you're essentially just watching a movie that's about this character who learns he has powers and then just killing everybody who can't do anything about it. Like, no one can stop him, and although that's entertaining to watch, I just felt that from like a story standpoint and the fact that this is a movie, personally I just felt like that was almost like a flaw to the film. You know, stories are supposed to have like a point to them. Although it is a horror film, you know, it is also a superhero film too. He is the character that has the powers, he has, you know, these abilities, and it turns out that he's turning into the villain. The rules of superhero films, comics, TV shows, whatever, you know, there's a superhero and then there's a villain to fight against it. He's the villain, so there should be this, I guess, in his point of view, antagonist that is against him that could possibly stop him. But in this movie, there isn't that. There is no character that could potentially be that. So despite me saying all that, I really don't regret seeing this film. I liked it that I saw it. I still feel this is a refreshing film, and I'm glad that David Yarovesky, you know, James Gunn, his brother and his cousin, I'm glad that they created this world that we, you know, get to see. If not them, I hope in the future maybe more filmmakers look this route, making a character that may be inspired by another superhero or just another character. We've had so many reboots and remakes where a lot of us just had the thought of, why don't you just make an original idea that could be based off of that? That leaves you with all this creative freedom, and because this movie had so much creative freedom, it just really disappointed me that it had a lot of potential because of said creative freedom that it didn't tap into. So with all that said, I'm going to give Brightburn a B-. Those are my thoughts on Brightburn. How did you feel about the Superman-inspired story? What movie do you think would be really cool to make that was inspired by another superhero? Put it down in the comments below. I want to know. As usual, if you like this video, subscribe, and thanks for watching.